Fantastic. Thank you very much for the second episode of our very famous I don't know how to call it podcast video YouTube channel.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited. I think it's almost been a year, right? I think we spoken last year of April or something. Can't believe it's been
I
that
think
long.
so. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Next one we need to do it much faster.
Yeah.
Cool. You suggested we started to talk a little bit before the recording. So and you said that our chat might be actually related to research ops. So basically, what we discussed was there is a construction outside of my office, and it's been going for a pretty long time. And I said that after starting to work in research ops, I think I started to understand better other operation roles, including what, for example, government organizations do, or what other operations companies do, and how they organize their work. And I think I can appreciate that sometimes their motivation can be completely the opposite. Like, for example, in some cases, for them, it's better to drag the work as much as possible and to make it as complicated as possible. Does it resonate what you've seen in the research ops area?
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of the other question that you shared up front, where it was all about like, is this job something that is kind of self-sufficient in a way? Like when you are hired as a research ops professional, your job is to build processes and to professionalize things that maybe people have done in a very chaotic way before. But that often means that things take longer, and it often means that you are actually adding things and not necessarily making them quicker or simpler, because you are trying to set up something that is scalable and more sustainable, etc. But at the same time, that's something that the longer I'm in this field, the more I see that the thing you initially wanted, which is like simplicity, speed, ease of use of the systems you have as researchers, is very rarely achieved. Because once you start creating the processes or start using dedicated tools for something that maybe was a message before, it is more complicated. So it kind of reminds me of what you were saying, is that when there are people whose only job or role it is to facilitate the process of something, their goal is not the end thing. The goal is the process. And they want to make sure that this is a satisfying process, that it is, it covers all the checkboxes, etc. And I think that's just something that is not always visible in the processes before you have a research ops person in a dedicated way. What I mean by that is a lot of the things kind of happen more naturally. People will drop a Slack message to the legal team and say, hey, can I do this and that? And then with a research ops person, there might be a process where you have to submit a form, and then some more time passes. And in the end, like, it is a better process and it's safer, and you will make fewer mistakes. But the way that it feels for the person that has to run the research is, I have to do more now. I have to remember that I have to do this process. I have to reach out to these people. Maybe they're really busy and they cannot help me straight away. So that's a very broad and open answer, but it's just something I keep on thinking about. It's like, is there an actual solution to many of the challenges we have that can satisfy all the needs of all the involved people? I'm not sure. Sometimes I think it's actually not possible.
Interesting. So basically, you're saying that in the chaos, each individual interaction with between two people, for example, it can be simpler because it's a chaos, and they can adjust that interaction specifically for their needs right now. But if there is kind of emerging order, that means that it's order across the board, which means that, again, that means that there might be extra complexity for those individual people because they need to take into account their kind of the order or the rules that are applied for everyone. Is that?
Yeah, and the funny thing about it is it's just not intuitive, because I think in essence, if research ops is done really well, it makes lives easier, and it will, like Claire was saying, it will reduce the amount of errors that people are making. And there's something in place where some people in the past wouldn't have known how to do something. but it just doesn't feel like that. And that's what sticks with people, is that you might have done exactly the same amount of steps, maybe even more, because you've made some mistakes or you've reached out to some person and they were not the right person to talk to. But in the end, it feels like, okay, I needed something done and I just found a way. Like I kind of struggled through it, but I found a way and then I was done, which at the same time gives you more that feeling of control. Like I'm a product manager, for example, or I'm a researcher and I need to get those insights. And then in some way you always get there. But with research ops teams, it's more, like I'm saying, more steps involved. You have to fill in a form, which is maybe not fun. You have to wait a little bit more, maybe. And then, yeah, maybe you are getting to that same result, but it just doesn't kind of feel the same way. And I think that's in generally in this industry, also with research in general, is a big problem, is the way that things feel, not the way that things are, right? That's the never-ending discussion also around like credibility or impact of insights. Is often people don't make very logical arguments when you are sharing out the results of a study. They will not have very scientifically proven ways of challenging something. Is more like a feeling, like, oh, I feel that this is a biased sample that you had, or I feel that this one participant is an outlier, even though they might make very good points. And I think that this kind of also applies to research ops. And yeah, kind of coming back to that example also with the construction side, etc., that you mentioned before, it's like, yeah, these are people that are having a very different role than the people on the actually doing the construction, or the people managing the business of a city, for example, and making sure that the infrastructure improves. Like all of these teams have very different goals and very different ways of working. And it's, for me, it's just one of the most complex things you can do as an ops person, to bring all of those roles together. And then, yeah, it's sometimes a very thankless job because then people are like, well, here's this new person that is supposed to make everything really easy for me, but now I have to fill in forms and now I have to wait longer. Like, what's the advantage I have? So it's quite difficult sometimes to see the bigger good of it all.
Interesting. So in this case, if we assume that sometimes applying research ops or introducing research ops rules for researchers, it can be longer or feel more complex for researchers. Who do you think is there, or what do you think is there, the beneficiary of their research ops then? If researchers can suffer a little bit, then what is research ops is for them?
That's an interesting question. I think the business kind of, it's more like a lot of times when these people are being brought on board, a lot of the stuff they have to do is to set up systems to measure the impact of what they are doing, which interestingly, I mean, that's kind of sidetracking, but it's very related, is something that researchers often struggle with, right? They are being asked to show the exact impact of their work. Like, how did you move the needle? How did you make us more revenue, etc.? Where I think research ops is a really good opportunity to make that point and say, you know, we did save money on parts of the research, which is recruitment. We did save a lot of money because we are maybe using less expensive tools. We have homegrown solutions now, these kinds of things. But when you're setting these things up, like the metrics that I'm using, for example, and as a research ops person, that's what I'm reporting on, a lot of them are not only relevant for researchers. They care about the quality of responses, for example. They very much care about the speed or the velocity, like how much research can you do and how quickly can you get the right participants. Yes, this is a very direct impact on their work. But at the same time, businesses don't hire additional roles to make other roles more happy. They hire them because they want to save money. They want to maybe scale their business. They want to get rid of some of the very costly outsourced solutions they have, or external providers that they have. So yeah, it's almost like a philosophical question at some point, because I think it has to be both. Otherwise, something has really gone wrong. But for me, in recent years, I'm thinking it's more of a business beneficiary that's behind this. And that's also something where I think I also wrote to you in advance of this chat. It might be very biased and it's not data driven or something, but I have the feeling that research ops people are often laid off when there are reorganizations and budgets are cut, because a lot of times it's being called a luxury. It's something that seems very additional. Yeah. Oh, you're so lucky you have a research ops person. We don't have that luxury. Like we see this all the time. Which then also like raises that question again, like why is it a luxury and what does it mean if these people are being let go at the first opportunity? Then it's probably not clear for either side that there's a benefit and there's a cost saving that you can have, and it makes people's lives easier.
Interesting.
I don't know if that answered the question.
No, it's definitely. I don't know the answer myself. I'm curious to learn what you think. I think I totally agree that research ops feels sometimes like a nice to have part. It's like, if a product team is reduced, it's usually designers who usually take the first. You can go. We don't need without developers, for example, the product doesn't exist, right? Without designers, it can exist, but it can be ugly or not clear how to use, but it still exists. And the same thing if the design team shrinks a little bit. I think researchers are first let to go, because again, without designers you don't have anything on the screen. Without researchers it can be not very intuitive and so on, or not efficient. And if the research team shrinks, research ops people first kind of go, which means that it feels like sometimes in some organizations, at least, if someone sneezes anywhere, it's like, oh, okay, we can fire research ops people then. I think, listening to what you said, I think I need to kind of refine the question a little bit, because what you said probably depends on what type of organization we're talking about, right? Because it can be a very small team, like a startup, for example. It can be medium size with, let's say, 100 developers, or it can be a large team with 20,000 developers. Do you think that in those at least three cases, research ops, or maybe we can start with what the organization needs? If you said that research ops is basically for the organization, do you think that in those three cases, organizations need different things? Hence, the research ops need to be different.
That's again something I probably never thought about in that specific or particular way. I can very well imagine that there are very different use cases or underlying goals that companies have to hire these kinds of people. So if we start with startups, I think a lot of the time it's probably things like there are limitations at some point that the ops team will be there to bridge. For example, you just don't have a very great tool set. You just don't have the hundreds of thousands of budget you can spend every year on panel providers, for example. So it's like, okay, we see that there's demand for research, but we cannot satisfy it. So we need someone to help us get there without spending these hundreds of thousands. So you probably have one person that is, added to the team, and then they get 6 different areas they're supposed to take care of. And then it's like, okay, your only job is to kind of make sure that people can do the research and that they can move on quickly. And then it's really like a very hands-on role that they're doing also. Okay, I don't know where we get the participants you need. So I will get the quotes from different panel providers without having a framework contract. It's a very one-off and ad hoc thing. Or maybe something else like, oh, we see that we have a customer base and we want to use them for our research. So I will go ahead and build a panel out of these users that we already have. So that is then a very hands-on. It's a very direct way of moving the needle. And I guess the bigger the company gets, the more this is okay, we have an organization of different people who will be part of squads, for example. This person is responsible for making sure that there's a process and everything is taken care of for this team or for this person. Even I've seen this in some really big companies. Every researcher has their own research ops person. And then they're saying like, I want to run a project of interviews, for example. Hey, can you make sure that we get 20 people booked in the next week? And then that person will go off and make it happen. And then it's like, okay, there's a centralized team. It kind of happens a little bit more in the background. You don't really know how they're getting there. Like, what are the budgets that they spend is completely separate, which is then, I guess, something that's much more technical, kind of. It's not like people don't really talk about like, oh, what do you need? How can I help you do your job better? Or is there anything that you're lacking? It's not really a lot like researchers and research ops people talking to each other, but more like head of this versus head of that. And then they're like, oh yeah, we uncovered there's a lack of something that we don't have yet, so make it happen, kind of. So that is very different from the more ad hoc and more targeted things that the smaller companies are probably doing. And also, I think a very obvious difference is the kind of access that people have to funding, the access they have to tools. Like when I would, and I'm actually in this situation right now as a freelancer, as a self-employed person. I'm working with a rather small company and a very, very large company. And in research ops particularly, there's definitely this difference of like in the smaller company, every time there's a new project on the horizon, it's more like we're creating a Slack channel and we're like, oh, okay, does anyone know a company that can help us with this? Can you send them an email? Do you know them? Like, do you have a good relationship? So maybe you do it. And then it's like, okay, we got a quote back. And then in the same channel, we will discuss, is it reasonable? Can we do this? Do we have the budget, etc.? Whereas in the very large company, it's more like, well, there's a project. The timing is next week. It's locked in. And then everyone does their thing. So it feels easy up until the point where something goes wrong, which in research happens often. Like when you're running interviews, people cancel at the last minute. Technical issues come up. Maybe the tool that is company preferred is just not giving you the best results. And one very tangible example of that is for me, because I'm German, I often do German parts of international projects. So for example, if there's a sample for Germany and there's a sample for the UK, then I'm going to do only part of that project. And then things like translation come up. And then oftentimes these very large companies, the only way they can do it is to use the company approved tool. But if it's a USA focused company, they don't really know so much about like what does quality of the translation mean, because everything there happens in English. It's not a big deal. Even with me, of course, they can communicate in English. So if I tell them, you know what, I used the translation feature, it's crap. It just doesn't give you anything that is usable. Then what? Like there's not really a solution sometimes. And then there's also not this talking to each other and quickly moving forward, just finding something, making it happen. That's just not possible, because you would have to go through a month-long process of getting approvals, changing things, then seeing objections from other teams. Like, why would we have to invest into something like this? So yeah, again, a very long answer, but it's like there's different dimensions for sure. There's pros and cons for both. So I wouldn't necessarily say research ops is better or worse in either of those variations of companies, but definitely the scope of things is so different and the way that people work together is so different that it just doesn't feel like the same function. One is like a machine and the other is more like people actually talking to each other and trying to find solutions.
Interesting. So, do you think it's fair to summarize what you said by basically in smaller teams, you need organizations need to accomplish specific task. Like for example, oh, today or this week we decided to work on this product or this feature, and then people organize to figure out how to support that specific feature till the end of the week or till the end of the quarter, right? And if we move towards larger organizations, then it's more about scale and how to support research across the board, for example, for the next 5 years. So what tools we need, how we organize, how we work with each other, and so on. So it's less about adapting and adjusting your structure for this specific feature or project right now. It's more about figuring out generic rules how we conduct research in general, which means that it's more difficult to set up those rules, but when they are set up, they actually help everyone.
Yeah,
Is it fair to
I would say them. Yeah, they are much more powerful. The setups that I see in bigger companies, like the amount of things you can do is just so much larger naturally, but it's like a cruise ship. You cannot change directions very quickly, and I think I see this as actually a problem because in our industry, a lot of things are changing all the time. Like, and of course, everyone's talking about it, like AI and how do we use it, etc. And in the big companies that I'm seeing from the inside, there isn't really a solution for supporting researchers using AI tools in a really satisfactory way. Like, there might be a company-approved AI tool that you can also use for getting things translated, but you won't have any of the other really cool stuff that could help you deal with a lot of the lab work and the stuff that just keeps you very busy but doesn't need a lot of expertise. So I think in general, you can do a lot more and you can be quicker a lot of the time with the standard program, with the classic things like running interviews, getting participants for a study and so on. But the fine print, like all the smaller things, or the things where you just want to experiment on something, you just want to try and you just want to see if this works, if this might be worth looking into, that is so difficult. I don't even think that in many cases it is possible at all, because these things just take so long and they need so many approvals. You need to go through so many hierarchy levels to really like change something or get something for your team specifically, because then it always has to be a global solution. And maybe as a side note, that's often a challenge I also see when it comes to tools or products that people are using that are dedicated to research ops or research in general, is that a lot of the time different teams in a company, let's say there's 10 different research teams in a global company, all of them will have the same issue if they don't have a dedicated UX research tool or a repository tool. They will all have the same struggles, like, oh, we're generating so many insights, but we don't have a really good way of sharing them or documenting them. And then all of them will go ahead and start researching different tools. And then as soon as they hear this name, like, oh, this is a very big name and they are a global company, you cannot just get a small deal with them. You cannot say, well, we're only a team of 10 people. We create maybe, 10 studies per quarter because we're B2B, whatever. That will just not work, because then they see, yes, but you have 20,000 employees in total, and how can I make sure that you're not sharing the access with others, etc. So as soon as these people try to find a better solution for them, it's difficult, and it often takes years to get something that then the company says, yes, this is the global solution that we can settle for. So
Interesting.
oh.
I definitely saw such kind of cases in large organizations because most of our clients are very large. And when I worked for Google, it was exactly the same story. And I think my takeaway from that experience is that I always saw the research process as a researcher, which means that for me, the research started when there was a research question in the product, right? Like, for example, we want to improve it, or we want to build something new and we don't know why and what exactly we're going to build. And the project ended when the research question was answered, right? You have a report, you talk to the product team, done. And then when I moved to research ops side, I actually started to see a much larger picture from the organizational perspective. As you said, research ops, I think I totally agree. It serves, at least partially, it serves the organization, not just researchers. And especially in large companies, I can kind of talk about this part of the spectrum where we have, let's say, 20,000 developers or like 100,000. I think my biggest takeaway from that switch from research to research ops kind of perspective is that a bunch of researchers or research projects don't add up as a support for a large product. Like, for example, what I mean by that, if we have, let's say, I don't know, a small app that has 100,000 users, for example, then you can have a team of, I don't know, 20 developers and 5 designers and 1 researcher or 2 researchers, and they can work with each other, and kind of 2 researchers working in parallel and kind of doing things, not always knowing about each other. It still works, right? They can meet, they can chat, and they understand what's going on. If we scale it up to, let's say, again, my easiest example is Google, for example. When I worked for the Android team, there were like 3 billion users of their product, which means that you have a huge development team and your design team is massive, which means that you need to plan for a project that can last for 3 years, can involve 20,000 people, and spreads across 15 different offices across the world, right? So if you have 2 people or 2 sub-teams that work in parallel and barely talk to each other, that just doesn't work. And this is the rule, right? Unlike developers where they have GitHubs and everything is kind of streamlined, and if you ask someone what happened a year ago, for example, with this code, you can go back and see who made the decision, for what reason, what was the previous version, what the new version, what it's made for, when it was released, and so on. With research, it's none of them is true. If you ask someone what happened last month, for example, with research, it's like, I don't know, it was last month, I don't remember. And multiply that, let's say, by 20, if you have 20 researchers in 15 different offices, adding individual research on top of each other, they just don't add up as a support for that project. They rather create a mass of individual research that maybe solve a very short-term goal and answer a very short-term question, but a big project is not about kind of tactical small goals, right? It's about achieving something large and developing something large. And small projects that don't translate into that scale where you have a large team of both product teams and support teams. And I think kind of a way to distill that for me, I think the biggest hurdle for research in large organizations is not even budget. Budget is basically unlimited. If you can justify spending $1 billion on something, yeah, of course, go on and spend $1 billion. The hurdle is complexity, right? Because we have some limit how much one person can basically fit inside our own head, right? And maybe some people can be more productive than others, so you can fit like 15% more. But in this case, you need to fit like 50,000% more. That just doesn't work. Like, you need to have a structure where all researchers and all managers and research ops people, they work together and they move a very large project that doesn't sit in one place. They move it gradually and steadily and reliably towards the goal. Exactly what developers do, right? Developers don't know about the whole mass of code. They know about their bit, but they know exactly what requirements are. They can track everything, they can release it and try and test, and they can roll back. And they have a repository of not just the code, they have a structure where they get or decide on what to work on and when that work ends and what was the goal, was it successful or not, and as a result of that, what's the next step, right? And that kind of gradual development of research, from my perspective, it's one of the biggest problems in large organizations to build that kind of research, right? One person working with one team can kind of know what the large goal is, but very rarely that goal is the goal of the whole project. It's very sub goal of the whole thing. So adding all those things together, it's impossible in one head because it's too complicated. So it needs to be divided somehow. And I think research ops, at least for me, how I see it right now in large organizations, is an attempt to solve that problem, that complexity, by multiple means, right? And it's interesting what you said about research ops working for organizations, because if we see it from that perspective, that means that probably research ops in different types of organizations can be drastically different. Like in small size companies, it can be about saving a budget, figuring out what the best panel provider is, or how to tool efficiently and not to spend a lot of money on that, right? If we move further towards large companies, budget, if the organization is built kind of in a way to actually facilitate building scalable products, budget is not an issue at all. Like, because for example, if we work on a product that's going to be released in half of the world, and their potential profit can be, let's say, 50 billion, right? It doesn't make sense to put that at risk to save how much we can save the best if we hire all the participants for free and we use all the tools for free, a couple of millions per year. So it doesn't make any sense to save a couple of millions to put 50 billions at risk, right? It's actually...
It probably wouldn't even be that much, right?
Yeah,
I think
I agree.
Research ops costs are, if you compare them to other costs, they are rather small.
Yeah,
like, of course,
totally
you can spend a lot of money, but that's another consideration. Yeah.
So I think for me, it's actually the opposite. It's how to spend as much as possible to move the needle of reliable, scalable research just slightly up, because it's so complicated, so difficult, right? So if we can spend an extra $100 million on just improving the scalability by 1%, we should totally do that, if it translates into higher probability of the product succeeding, right? And what I think I saw in practical terms in many organizations was that, like, for example, when I was a researcher, for me personally, switching kind of my mindset from I need to perform a task, finish research, and deliver takeaways from the research to the team, that was the end goal. Switching from that to working in a very large team where the goal is completely different. Like, it took me probably, I don't know, a year just to understand that the goal is completely different. It's not about one specific research. We don't care about polishing all the nuances of the UI and so on. It's rather about moving the whole, as you said, the whole kind of ship towards the goal. And I think I see the same issue, or it's not rather an issue, it's a mismatch between a mindset of people who move in research ops from small and medium-sized companies to large small-sized companies. They do the same thing that they did before that actually worked and did matter. Like, okay, we can save money, or we can reduce tooling. It will save 15% of their research ops budget. On this large side, it doesn't matter. It actually makes things worse, I think.
That's so interesting. But what is the goal then? Like, you were talking about like moving the needle, like genuinely, like towards that higher goal. But does that mean that in your experience in these really large organizations, did research ops people have the same goals as researchers?
That's a very good question. I think so. Basically, for people listening, we exchanged a couple of questions before this chat. Can just to share what we are mostly interested in right now, both of us, and that I think was one of the questions. So basically, I think it touches several topics we discussed, and so basically, as far as I understand, the question is, there are pragmatic tasks that research ops needs to deal with, right? For example, it can depend on specific organization. For example, if for historical reasons, even if budgeting is not such a big issue, but for example, recruitment has been a pain all the time, research ops people might spend more time on recruitment despite it's not the most productive way to spend their time. But if we remove all those accidental kind of tasks, so basically the question is, if recruitment is sorted out, if technology is sorted out, we're fine with tools, what remains in the research ops domain?
Yeah.
And I would say that in large companies, it's very research dealing with research ops is very close to management of research. Because what you said in the beginning, when, for example, for one specific researcher, introducing some rules or procedures, it might feel tiresome or more time consuming, right? When you apply this principle across the board, it can actually help the whole organization to move forward. But again, there is a caveat that I've seen so many cases when this kind of reasoning it justified any extra complexities in the process. Like, for example, a practical example, when I was at Google, there was a period when people decided that, okay, we spend so much time on hiring participants that it's probably better to have an internal team to deal with recruitment. And there were a couple of people, then there were 4 people, then there was a team, there were like a larger team, there was a manager, and there were like a sub team and so on. And for people sitting next to that, physically sitting next to the team, the process probably worked. I worked in London, and the team was mostly in the United States. And for me, it was so much more difficult to deal with them, because any question you send, you receive an answer 2 days later, right? So instead of going back and forth within a couple of minutes, especially if you can physically go there and chat to someone, it took me 2 weeks just to set the process going. So I know multiple researchers who started to work under the radar. Yeah, we do have a team, but their added complexity is so tremendous that it's much easier for me to either hire and search personally or to hire an agency, and ultimately it's going to be much cheaper and faster, despite we're going to the external contractor, and despite we usually pay like 30% on top compared to their average project, because otherwise it would just take forever. So that's, I think, probably my very long way to answer your question about in those cases, in large organizations, do research ops teams work for researchers or organizations? And I think
Or do they work for themselves? Like, I think one of the questions you also noted was like, even if everything worked super well, like you come in and you optimize everything there's to optimize, what then? Like, these people have a job also, they have a team also, they have a manager, they have careers, they have certain needs that also want to be met. So I think it's often seen as this like, okay, once we get to this magical point of everything is just working really smoothly, then everyone will be happy. But is that actually the case? Or would that mean that they're being laid off because they're redundant?
Yeah.
I mean, in maybe harsh words, but it's definitely something I also am thinking about. The more you professionalize these kinds of themes and the more you automate as much as you can, does that then make these people redundant at some point? And I have never seen a team that really is there. So I guess it's probably just the North Star of like doing this job and you want to get there, but you never really do because companies are complex and there's just so much work to do. But at the same time, yeah, as soon as you have those teams, they have needs. Like, we want to have weekly meetings. Maybe we want to have a daily stand-up. And it just adds a lot of admin that is not necessarily related to the core tasks that they're doing, which is normal. And every team has that. But it also means that things will probably take a little bit longer than you would have anticipated them to take. So it's kind of this almost like a conflict of interest. Mm-hmm. You want someone who's almost like a ninja or someone like a heavy hitter who comes in and like does all this stuff and it's really quick and it's really easy and it's really cheap. But is that actually possible in the long term? I'm not sure.
I think you're spot on. And so basically you're saying that there are basically 3 potential beneficiaries of the research ops can work. It can be companies, researchers, or research ops themselves. And I think the third is definitely the case. I think before the chat, I mentioned that I learned a lot about research ops by reading and studying economics. And that specific question, I think it was Thomas Sowell, it's an American economist. He answered it perfectly. He said that organizations mostly work for themselves. They care about their own survival, right? And this is their primary goal for many of them. It doesn't mean that people would kind of sabotage their work to to keep their job, but still there is a motivation to kind of to keep going. And his example was that politicians don't work for people; they mostly work for interests of politicians, and trade unions mostly work not for workers; they work for trade unions. And I think in that kind of, if we extend that principle, research ops teams, they definitely have research ops as their client, basically themselves. Do you know any case when someone was hired to do a job, and at some point that person kind of reported that, yeah, I fixed all the problems and now we don't need to do anything? Is that usually a rule, or the rule is the opposite, when someone is hired to fix a problem and then the person reporting that, okay, we figured out the problem, it's actually much much larger than we expected, so we need one extra person, we need to grow, we need to higher budget.
We need more time, yeah.
Yeah, which one is more realistic?
Interestingly, I mean, and that might sound like I'm just talking bullshit, but honestly, the one variant of that is definitely me. Like I'm a self-employed individual, like I'm a solo entrepreneur, if you will. And I often work with companies on specific problems. It's not like, oh yeah, we're setting up a contract for a year and we have this retainer, and whatever happens, you're definitely going to work those 20 hours every week. Sometimes I have that too. Like I have long-term relationships, but a lot of the time on top of that, I do things that are more like very targeted. We have this problem. We think you can help us. Please do. And then my goal is to actually achieve that goal in not so much time, because I also want to move on. I want to, maybe enjoy my time for other things. So even if it's a very interesting task, I will always try to finish it at some point, hand off, have a really nice session with everyone explaining what has been done, have really good documentation, and then kind of walk away. And then sometimes there are opportunities to say, okay, well, next, let's work on something else together. But I do see this as a distinct point in time where it's like, yes, we have what we want and we can move on working with that. Mm-hmm. But that's a very specific business model to have. And yes. Full-time employees don't have that, of course. Like it's the complete opposite. You are having a contract, you want it to be unlimited, and you want to be sure that in the next years you will have a safe job. So of course, it's kind of the opposite. It's more like you were saying, like, okay, I have started to work on this, but now that we're at this point, we can do even better. Or now that it's 6 months later and maybe my OKR was to get this MVP going, then of course I will need the next year to build it out and to scale it and to make it really, really good. And I don't even think that that's unreasonable, because there's always more you can do. I don't think in product management, in design, in research, there's always more that we can do. But realistically, some of the things that in research ops are, for me, are more like they are not open-ended. They are closed-ended things, mm-hmm. where maybe having a solution that has moved the needle and that has improved certain things is good. And then maybe it's also good to move on to something else. And that was, again, like something that I think I shared with you before. I've been thinking about this a lot. Like for this type of job specifically, is this a really good use case for maybe changing the ways that companies and humans work together? Because then at the same time, I see, and I'm in this research ops community, the Slack community, which is quite large, where you can see a lot of folks searching for research ops roles, and a lot of folks sharing that they have been laid off, which again is like, it is not representative, but there are a lot of people in there. So I wouldn't know if that aligns with industry developments, mm-hmm. but I do get the feeling that, yes, these people are often affected by layoffs and redundancies, etc., which is not only a very difficult time to go through and a very unpleasant experience, but it also can hurt the career of these people a lot. If you've been on the same level for years and then you get hired, you work in a company for a year, then they randomly decide to do another reorg, and then you're laid off, and then you try to find something similar, but it can take a long time because there's a lot of pressure on the job market right now. It also kind of hurts your career as someone who's in this field in a long-term permanent position, ideally. So it's not my answer. It's not what I think everyone should be doing, but I am thinking about it more like, is this a really good, quote unquote, use case for maybe changing the way that people work with companies and seeing it more as like a project-based thing instead of a permanent thing. But then I cannot just close like that. But then again, it kind of depends again on the company and the complexity and the size. Because if a global, extremely big company would only have, temporary workers dealing with research ops stuff, it would probably be a complete mess. So I think it is not at the same time suitable for every kind of organization, every size of organization, etc. But I think more often than not, it's something we should be thinking about, because if not, it introduces all of these weird thoughts that we just discussed, these weird like assumptions, like, is there a conflict of interest? Is it really like, who are we serving? What are our goals? I think for many research ops people, that's also not clear. It's not just us chatting about it, but it's probably something that's quite of a shared sentiment, probably. Yeah.
Interesting. So basically you're saying that there are mostly two types of kind of approaches to the work, right? It can be either project-based, and we start the project, we end the project is gone. Or it can be work hour based. We start at 10, we finish at 5, and tomorrow we're going to do the same thing, right? And you're saying that research ops is probably, or maybe many operational roles are more suited for the project based, because it reduces the incentive to basically improve behind their the point of diminishing return. When again it's good enough, we can, okay, it's not perfect, but we should switch to something else, because improving that further, like for example reducing the budget even further, or I don't know, spending more time on tooling, can be actually counterproductive, because it would distract us from other things, and at the same time it wouldn't improve the outcome, comparing to how much time we spend and how much we distract other people and how much burden we put on researchers kind of to follow all the rules. Do you mean that in that case that some of the research ops, at least functions, are better suited for kind of outsourcing to external companies that focus on a specific thing, rather than bringing everything in-house and in dealing with everything across the board?
I think that could be a good idea. And again, like probably something every company would have to evaluate for themselves. I would never say like, this is the one way that every company should do it. Definitely not. Hell no, like that would be very dangerous. But I do think, like you were saying, there are some needs or some roles even that I think are very well suited for that. And things like tooling or building a repository, building an in-house panel, I think these are very well suited, because it is something that ideally is like a closed entity. Yes, it has to be embedded in the company. Yes, it has to feel like something that the company owns and not the person coming in. There are some challenges around that, but I think if you're experienced and you're doing it really well and you have a good process for that and you do it the right way, you're just like working with people and talking to people as you're doing it, then this could be a very good thing. Because, and that's kind of talking back to the thing I spoke a bit about towards the beginning, we have a challenge often in research ops with acceptance of people who are used to doing things in their own way. For example, I worked with a mid-sized company recently in a research ops function as well, in a limited, like temporary contract. And there are so many people who have been with the company for many years, and they have had exactly the background of the customers they now have, which is in hospitality. So these people are like, oh yeah, I'm very experienced in that. I actually know more or less what people will say. So it's difficult to even make that argument, like we need to talk to actual customers. And then they have their own lists of people they know, friends, friends of friends, like they had their own kind of way of, yeah, I just need some feedback from people, without maybe noticing or realizing that this is a very biased way of getting feedback, because you might be contacting the same people again and again and again, and they are not giving you a neutral view anymore because you've been talking so much to them. So that was one of the situations where it's difficult to say, I'm coming in as someone in the same team. We've been working alongside each other for a long time, and I'm telling you now, you need to do this differently. And I made up a new process and I made up a new form you now need to fill in. That's very difficult, because people are like, well, I know you, we've known each other for a long time. I'm used to doing things my way, so why would you tell me to do something differently? However, when you are an external person and you're being introduced as this is our expert to help us professionalize the way that we talk to customers, and they are creating a new solution for us and working with us to make this a success, it's a very different effect on people. They show up more to meetings, they listen to you more as the expert, and yes, they will also present their doubts and concerns to you, but it's just a different relationship. It's more like, here we have taken some money, we are spending it on someone who's coming in to only work on this for us. This is something that is definitely going to come. It's a non-negotiable, and we will move forward from there. So it's like multiple things coming together that I think also help the adoption and acceptance of new solutions. If it's not just someone who has been there all the time, you can tell them, yeah, well, yeah, it looks cool, like I like it, but you know what, I still have this other solution, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that this will never happen with an external person. I just think that there's a slight difference in how people appreciate and acknowledge the new solution if it comes from someone who is the expert that was brought in and is only working on this for the company, and then having like a launch session to present the solution and then working with people to adopt it, which I think is just, it feels more official and it feels like a bigger thing, instead of, well, we noticed it's not really working well, so here's something I've been working on, which again is like oversimplified. It's probably not how it works, but I hope you know what I mean. Like there's another advantage, not just of not having to pay someone for many years. If actually you only maybe need a few things, and then you continue from there and you add to the scope and you widen it and you grow, etc. You will grow anyway as a company. That's what capitalism is made for. Like, companies will make sure that you're growing and that you have more work to do. You don't need to make that up for the team. So there will always be more work, there will always be more challenges, and that's where I think sometimes it can help. And then, like you also proposed, not having this for like the whole research ops team, because that again could present a really big challenge of like making it difficult to have a foundation and to have the same standards and to have the principles and to have that knowledge also. Because if that person who is coming on a limited basis, like on a short-term contract, whatever, if they leave, even if they have done like perfect documentation, there's still a part that also leaves in terms of knowledge and experience, etc. So if there's no one else who has followed along or who can own the initiative on the company side, that's also a very bad situation. So I would never advocate for that either. I just think that if we had the choice of saying we're hiring 5 people full-time, or we hire 2 people full-time, and then we have 3 people that we can maybe loop in on a case-by-case basis and have them complete projects for us without distractions, without town hall meetings, without anything else, just to come in, create something for us that fits to our needs, but also fits into our company and our style, all these kinds of things, and then they leave again. I think that could actually be a really good solution, and also then probably protect more the core staff. That is then a really clear value proposition of why they're there, what they are doing, what are their goals, how do they fit in, etc. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
To you, do you think?
So basically, I agree that there are multiple kind of facets of why it can be difficult to change how researchers work, and one of them, I totally agree, is kind of authority of who actually is offering the change, right? And I've seen multiple ways how it can be done. Like, for example, it can be other researchers. When everybody realizes that when the system doesn't scale, kind of it's painfully obvious. You still can conduct your study, everything is fine, up until a point when you delivered your takeaway, and then there's still a lot of work needs to be done. Like, you need to work with a larger team, or you need to spread your knowledge across the research team, or you need to put it somewhere where it can be found. and it's extremely difficult to do. It's like literally painful. So at some point, I saw multiple researchers saying, okay, I have an idea. We're going to do this way. We're going to put all their PDFs in one folder, and then we are going to scan them again and put them somewhere in the cloud. And when you search for something, you're going to do this and this and that and so on. And it can be exciting for the first time, but then you know how it's going to end. The researcher is going to switch to something else. The researcher has their own daily job. So when the next project comes, they're going to drop everything the whole fantastic system they decided, like they envisioned, and nobody's going to follow, and it's going to die and just increase the complexity. And after you've seen that happening 3 times, for example, it's very difficult to be excited when there's another researcher coming forward saying, oh, I have an idea how to simplify everything.
Yeah.
So I think one extra advantage of having a person from outside is, it can be a long-term project without distracting anyone from your core team, right? Because there's so much things you need to deal with right now. And hiring someone from outside is much easier, especially for large companies, than to open a permanent headcount. And there are downsides of the permanent headcount, which is you need to specify what this person is going to do, which again comes back to we either work on a project based or on a work time based, right? So if we specify exactly what the person is going to do, we fit that person into that box of, oh, we need someone to deal with let's say participant recruitment, and when actually that kind of problem is sorted out, it's very difficult to move or extend that job description into, yes, and we need help with, lab support, and we need a lot of other things, and we need to reorganize how researchers work, right? Comparing to that, bringing someone who specializes in a very specific area from outside and see it as a temporary solution, I think in some cases it can be much more realistic and a pragmatic approach. I think after you said about kind of different types of those internal projects, what you said that it can be difficult to deal with them from inside. I have a feeling that it can be difficult to deal with them from outside as well, because
For sure. Yeah.
like it's not let me rephrase. I was lucky enough to work with people who deal with organizational design, with like legendary people. Like they're very, very, very good at that. And this is a pretty old area, right? It's not, I don't know, it's not 100 years old, but there is substantial knowledge and experience there. And how they usually work, they usually go to the first person in the organization, usually the owner, not even the top management, the owner of the organization, and they talk about typical issues, and they can try to change their kind of the culture in the organization, starting from top down, right? Or from bottom up if it matters, but they need a buy-in from the first person because it's a huge change and a very long-term change. I think that might work in the research ops domain as well, if there were a lot of examples when people actually tried to fix things, or there were successful cases and there were experts that had experience of going through multiple organizations, improving something, making things worse and learning from that experience and so on. But I don't know such people. I don't know a lot of people who had experience with, let's say, a couple of dozens companies with hundreds of books written on that, kind of conferences and organizational support to grow that experience in the research ops area. So I have a feeling that I totally agree that for individual tactical questions, it's probably easier to hire someone from outside, especially as soon as it gives you an option to experiment. Because, as you said, a lot of people bring their own expertise and way of working with them, right? So some person from outside might be completely different from another person That which means that
Definitely.
you have a chance kind of to go through multiple mindsets basically and see which works, which doesn't. At the same time, going kind of one or two levels up, if we look into reorganizing the whole idea of how researchers should work, for example, to make the whole research business scalable, then do you think that that level is susceptible to kind of to people from outside coming and dealing with that, or do you need someone from inside, or at least someone long term, let's say a year or a couple of years, being an outside from outside, or inside or outside of the organization? Do you think that kind of different level of improving research ops or research in general is, or it can be dealt with by bringing people from outside and just kind of as consultants?
Mm, that's so difficult to answer. I mean, as always, it depends. It depends on the organization and the person that you bring it in. But I think, like you said, like this aspect of at least having known the company for a while is, I think, crucial, because that is definitely something I've seen over all those years in research ops, is that there is no standard really. There is nothing that you can just take and apply. There are core principles, yes, but they are so broad that for knowledge management, for example, they are just so broad that you cannot just walk into any company and say, I know something about knowledge management, and in a few weeks' time, I can optimize everything that you have according to those basics. No, you need a lot of time, you need a lot of conversations, you need to be a very persuasive person, like all of these things that are just difficult to do if you don't have any background. And for me, the most successful projects are when I have a really good and close relationship to the person that can tell me the most about the company, and who are the people who really make a difference, who are the people I should be talking to, what are things that I need to keep in mind. These are all not things that are based on my expertise. They couldn't be, because they're just so individual, that I think if you don't have that, and if you're just coming in and people are saying, you are the top consultant and please fix everything, I don't think it's really possible. And we see that with some of the big names, right? Of the really, really big consulting companies, that very often the kinds of deliverables that they produce, they make us laugh sometimes, because it just seems so basic. Like there is this example of waste management in New York City by one of these big companies, where a suggestion was to have trash cans instead of putting trash on the street. And you're like, are you kidding? Because I mean, that was probably something that was paid for in like 6 or 7 figures, this whole project. And that's not really mind blowing, you know? And of course, there was more to it, but in general, like, I think if you expect someone external to just come in and fix a very complex solution in a short amount of time, it's not really possible. You need to either spend a lot of time and talk to those people and have that space to really immerse yourself into that situation before you can make really, really targeted and really impactful suggestions and changes. Or you have just been in that company for a longer time and you already have that kind of knowledge to then say, okay, we have a new assignment for you, or please work on this for us. And then you can say yes, because I already know all the different dots that are connected and what this problem really means. So yeah, I think it's either or. But just coming in and expecting someone else, especially in this area, maybe there are other areas where it is possible, but I think in research ops, it's just too individual.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's interesting when you asked the question about whether in large organizations research ops works for researchers or organizations, or research ops themselves. Kind of the question kind of is still at the back of my mind, and a couple of things that I think I can say. The first one is, I think in large companies, it's painfully obvious that this system is not scalable. Like, for example, when I was hired at Google, you usually start with helping a specific team, and it's totally fine. And its transition from kind of a medium-sized company to like a huge-sized company is kind of seamless. You basically do the same thing, and then in half a year or in a year, you start realizing that you're actually detached um, from the biggest part of the project, right? And you're detached not because you don't want to, or not because you cannot travel. Like in Google, it used to be a rule that you need to travel several times a year to the headquarters to meet people and kind of to chat with your colleagues. But it doesn't solve the problem. You cannot chat about all research that all researchers do at the same time, right? All the time. It's not scalable. Some kind of newsletters, they don't work because you don't have time to explain everything you do, and you definitely don't have time to read what other 200 researchers do all the time, like every day, right? Some kind of repositories don't work because they're not proactive. So you can put everything in the repository, but it doesn't talk to you back. When you don't know what to ask, you don't know that you need to go there and ask a question. And especially when there are large kind of all hands meetings and people start saying that what they've been working on, and you're like, oh, hold on, so you've been working on a project that sounds exactly the same that I've been working on for the last, let's say, year and a half, and we never met, we never talked to each other, I didn't even know that you're in the team, and it's basically the same thing, and there probably there is another third or the fourth project exactly the same in the organization. At that point, kind of, it's painfully obvious that the system doesn't scale, right? So I think whoever comes with a solution, they address a pain point. They don't come from the point of the authority saying that I know better than you. You work not well enough. This is how you need to work tomorrow. They come from a point where everybody is aware we have a problem. I have at least maybe not a solution, but at least I have a potential solution to the problem. I want to attempt to solve that, right? So it's kind of a soft power rather than coming from the point of the authority. I think maybe in a way it's the same relationship that researchers have with the product team, right? They cannot go back and dictate saying, guys, I saw a problem that tomorrow you're going to change this. Not in most of the cases, the product team is not going to listen, right?
No.
It's rather... see, this is the evidence. This is a short video of a participant kind of staring at your product for 5 minutes and not having a clue what to do. And you want to make it obvious for everyone that there is a problem. So it's not you're dictating them what to do. Like they want to change because they realize there's a problem. I think it's the same relationship maybe with the researchers and the product team as with research ops and researchers, right? Mm-hmm. They come demonstrating, you know there is a problem. I potentially have a solution, right? Let's work together to try to apply that solution. So I think answering your question about research ops in large organizations, I think ultimately it's for the good of the organization, but I've never seen a researcher who would say that I know that for the larger team it would be better if I work differently, but I don't care, I want to work as I want, right? As you said, everybody has a preference, but in most of the cases, people are willing to change their preferences if they truly see that it doesn't work at a large scale. So I think maybe rephrasing the question that for large organizations, research ops is mostly about dealing with processes rather than with people, right? And it's very difficult to define what the process is, especially as soon as it can be artificially parachuted from the top, right? As an order, and just as you said, it can add the complexity rather than reducing the complexity, unnecessary complexity. I think the best definition of a process I've heard was, if you can forget about this, it's not a process. It's like, I've seen companies where when they deal with technology, for example, or with tooling, they say that, oh, our process is, we'll ask researchers to scan all their, let's say, consent forms and then upload a specific folder immediately after each study. And A, it's not a process because people will forget about that, and B, people will forget about this. It's not going to work. So I think a distinctive kind of difference between research ops and medium-sized and large-sized organizations is a the focus is completely different. Like it's scalability and being able to keep the pace with the product team, right? With all their tools where they know what they do. They mostly have a scalable solution, kind of scalable process, and researchers don't. Like researchers in this case, I think, at least from my experience, they are often the bottleneck, right? Yeah, today we can find the participants, tomorrow it's difficult, then something cancelled, and we need to reschedule. And in large organizations, it doesn't work like that. You need to be able to deliver regularly and reliably in the same format all the time, regardless of it's the same researcher or not the same researcher, same team or different, same office or different country. It should be kind of a bit unified in that regard. It's the first difference. I think the second difference is a non-priority. Like, for example, saving money is a non-priority, or optimizing in terms of kind of resources. Of course, obviously, it's important, but it's kind of the
it's not very tangible.
Yeah, it's a secondary thing. Yeah, if somebody manages to figure out how, in companies like Facebook, for example, Meta, or Microsoft, how to make research scalable, and it costs only $10 billion a year, I'm pretty sure people will jump on that, or let's say $1 billion a year. And the third change, third difference is higher focus on processes rather than on individual solutions. And again, personally for me, it took a while to realize that actually that's not a bad thing. Like, practical example, for example, when I worked for Google, I started to work in Russia, and Russia was one of, I think, 3 markets where Google didn't dominate the search area. So it was Yandex, and it was seen as one of basically a single case when Google kind of didn't win the local market. And one of the ways how people who worked in Russia, how they see how that situation can be improved for Google, was to improve all the localized services to make them more compatible, make them easy to compete with other local services, like Yandex, for example, or for other businesses. And for that, you need to change a specific implementation or localization of a product, right? Improve translation, for example, or add features that people in that specific market need, and so on. And there was a long debate about if it's worth doing in the company like Google, because, for example, if you change something right now, that means that in the next release, which is going to happen next week, right? And the release comes from their central place, so that means that there is a system that is translated to 50, or like let's say 250 languages, or 100. And Russian is only one of them, so that means that in the next release, everything you've done for the previous release is going to be overwritten, because if it comes from the same central location. So you need to change the whole process to allow differences in all the different places, right? Or you need to completely cut the product and work on that as kind of separately in parallel, which is completely unpractical in large organizations. So it took me a while to realize that despite I see a specific bug in the UI, and the bug, I think, prevents a company to win a market that is considered extremely important, it's not worth my time to fix that bug. It's much more important to work on the whole process. And if someone magically figures out how to keep the process both international and scalable and pay attention to small details, then it's worth doing that. If it's not implemented, then fixing small issues is just counterproductive, despite it feels good, and this is what researchers do.
Yeah, but the focus is different, and you start to realize how you need to prioritize certain things, and that is inherently different from what a researcher would do, right? If you're more focused on the process, maybe, that's definitely a good takeaway also for people who might have trouble seeing the difference, right? Because that, I think, is also often the case. So yeah, makes sense.
Cool. Okay,
We've talked for a long time. Yeah.
yeah, we can take a pause. I can cut it out later.
Yeah.
How do you feel?
Good. Yeah, it's interesting. Very different from last time, I think, when we
Yeah, yeah,
spoke.
yeah.
But yeah, I like it.
Do you feel that having questions or topics before helps?
Yeah, totally. It helped me kind of connect some of the things. And because sometimes, I mean, all the questions we talk about are super open ended. It's not like,
Yeah.
oh, what's the answer to this and that? But it's more like, what do you think? So I think it's good to have this very loose mind map in a mind before, because we agreed that they are interesting before. So it's
Yeah,
good
yeah.
for both of us to think about, okay, how can we maybe make a bridge to the next one? So I think it's better, actually. Yeah, I like that.
I'm sorry, sometimes I was lost in thoughts because you asked such a deep question that I was like, oh, wow.
Like, oh, I'm
Yeah,
on
yeah,
the spot
yeah.
now.
I
don't know.
had to
But
prepare,
likewise, yeah.
yeah, I had to kind of prepare a list of things that I might say or related to what kind of I thought about, and kind of, you completely kind of moved the focus into a more interesting and deeper
Yeah.
area.
That keeps it interesting and
Yeah,
not
yeah, absolutely.
boring, I guess. Yeah.
Do you feel that if we make the next one, do you feel that it's worth kind of defining those areas even further? Like, for example, we can split the talk into 3 parts, and it can be like 3 questions we decide up front.
And I was actually just, as you started to talk about, I didn't know what was coming, but I was thinking also maybe we can have like an overarching topic next time. So it's
Oh,
more
interesting.
like in this talk,
I
and
like
then
this.
maybe 20 minutes, but we only talk about one topic. And then it's like really deep, but it's only this one area that could also work. And then
Yeah,
we
let's
have
do
like
it. Let's do it.
a catchy way to promote it also, maybe. Yeah.
I love this. Yeah.
Okay.
Because like my general feeling, Frank, from the discussion is that I get a lot from talking to you. Like, there are a lot of ideas. Like, even what you sent in WhatsApp was super interesting, and like just being able to discuss some things. For me personally, I realize the shortcomings in like my own shortcomings in some specific areas. For example, I thought that I have an answer to your question until you ask the question, and then I go, oh, I don't know what to say actually.
Yeah.
So
But
that's
it's the
super
same
useful.
for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I at the same time I don't know what other people might think by just watching us talking. I have no clue if
It's true.
if it's useful or
But
not.
honestly, I think it's kind of the same. It's like a very vague area to be in. And in research, there's like an agreed baseline of things that are good to say and bad to say on some questions. But I just don't think we have that in research ops. It really is like pretty open. But I might be wrong. Like you were saying, maybe some people are like, oh, that's bullshit. But even then, I would be interested to hear that, because
Yeah,
a lot
absolutely.
of we're talking about is
Yeah.
based on experience, and that is valid in a way.
Mhm.
It might not be applicable to other experiences that people
Absolutely. I think the kind of the bullshit story is very unique and rare, because I think research ops and research in general, kind of by necessity, is a very closed area. Companies are not willing to share the research in general, and especially their failures in the research, right? So if you hear someone talk in the conference or in the book, like anywhere, it's mostly a success story, right?
Yeah, of course. It's always like, oh, it was so easy.
Yeah, it was
this
so good.
10
Yeah,
step
and
plan.
it was me mostly.
It's never like
yeah,
that.
yeah. I was so successful.
Yeah.
But yeah, talking about what people tried and then it made the situation worse is extremely rare and I think useful as well.
Yeah,
So actually,
that's true.
maybe we shouldn't cut this part us talking about next.
just
next-
just as an add-on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's something I would like to see so much more from people, to have like almost like failure stories, but then what you learn from it. Because I think that's where it's like true
Yes.
leadership
Mhm.
is like also being able to say, well, that was a fail and I know why and I know what I'll do better next time. I guess we all have those experiences, but they are very behind closed doors, which is a shame.
True.
Because we could prevent others from doing the same. And I also think that that's so, like, sometimes it makes me cringe when people are rather senior and they pretend like they know everything. Like, I know that's not true. I know I don't know everything. I know everyone else doesn't know everything. So it's very weird when people act like that in meetings or
I agree.
chats now. Yeah.
I think in addition to personal failures, I think for me personally, it's extremely useful when we can share like shortcomings in some specific areas. Like, for example, what we started to discuss, where research ops works for research ops, And I think I've seen it's not just mostly about people; it's about cases, right? Cases when a research ops person was hired, and I can see that basically there are multiple ways how you can go forward, right? And one of those ways might result in higher probability of issues for researchers. But that also means that the necessity of research ops role is higher as well.
It's
It's
even
like,
higher.
yeah, like as soon as researchers start complaining that, oh, we failed a high profile study because of research ops, that means that, oh, I am the research ops person, I need more resources, maybe I need to hire someone, I need to become a manager, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So, and again, I haven't seen anyone who would actively and knowingly sabotage the work kind of to get more power and more money, but it's still motivation is still there. Kind of, it still moves, pushes people to specific area.
Maybe it's really subconscious. Like subconsciously, these things happen as well. I can also imagine. I've seen that many times in project management as well, where people make up things and they make up meetings so their agenda is full, so it feels like they're really busy, like just these kinds of things. And I guess it's human also. It's like, if I'm getting paid to do something and I have nothing in my calendar for this week, then oh my god, what if somebody notices? So I don't know, it's like that's almost like a bigger society topic, the way that we work these days. So likewise, it was fun. Let's not let so much time pass until the next time. I know we chatted in December, didn't we? But it was not recorded. So let's do it again.
Cool. Okay. I love your idea of having specific topics. So maybe we can discuss it offline and
let's do it.
Change the mode. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a nice weekend.
You too.